Greetings and welcome to the Inner Manage channel. I'm Dr. Gyesie, transformational coach and inner manage here, where we help folks overcome, transform, and heal their lives right here, right now, to live optimum and happy lives in this paradigm, not a future one. Today we're going to be diving into a very profound concept, which is how escaping narcissistic abuse is not just about self-preservation, but also an essential step towards ending negative karmic cycles and breaking away from spiritual slavery. So again, how escaping narcissistic abuse is not just an act of self-preservation, but also an essential step toward ending negative karmic cycles and breaking free from spiritual slavery. So again, this is not just about surviving abuse, it's about thriving and about ending cycles that may have lasted for generations. So let's start with karma and karmic cycles and narcissistic abuse. So karma is often misunderstood. In Eastern philosophies like in Buddhism, karma is more than just cause and effect. It's about cycles of repeated actions, thoughts, and emotions that create the conditions of our reality. So when we engage in a toxic relationship with a narcissist, for example, it's as though we are caught in a karmic loop, bound by patterns that draw into the same destructive dynamics that keep us entrapped in this loop. For many empaths, the recurring theme of bad luck or I attract difficult people isn't just happenstance. This cycle reflects a deeper karmic wound that demands healing. For example, in Buddhism, there's a concept of samsara, which is the wheel of suffering, that we are all bound to until we awaken to our patterns and choose liberation. So escaping narcissist abuse or narcissism is about the decision to end this repeating patterns, these repeating cycles. And frankly, people live 60, 70, 80 years in these cycles without realizing that they could break out of that matrix, but they get stuck in that code, that pattern, because it's an addictive pattern. It's what they're used to, and haven't even imagined that an alternative reality is even possible. Now, I want to talk about how narcissism or narcissistic abuse rewires the brain. So in recent years, neuroscience has provided insights into how abusive relationships affect the brain. So when we're in a narcissistic relationship, the trauma of manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional harm creates lasting effects on our neural pathway. Our brains become wired to anticipate threat, mistrust others, and view the world through a lens of survival rather than peace. See? So the amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes overreactive, while the prefrontal cortex, the part that's responsible for logic and decision making, loses effectiveness. So the amygdala is consumed by fear, and the part where you could dream and imagine is consumed by the fear of the amygdala. It's sort of like a hard drive, and so it's consumed by that. So your prefrontal cortex doesn't have the space to create, think, and framework in a way that's accessible and useful for you. Do you see? So the physical restructure of the brain is a form of spiritual bondage. It keeps us locked in survival mode, which blocks our access to higher levels of consciousness. And to this end, to end these karmic cycles actually, we must physically and emotionally and spiritually heal from these effects. This is the danger of what these words and spells do to us. So practices like meditation, which are scientifically proven to calm the amygdala and strengthen the prefrontal cortex, play a critical role in breaking this bondage. So for a long time, existential philosophers like Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, explains that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment we find its purpose. Suffering ceases to be suffering the moment we find the purpose of the suffering. Escaping a narcissistic relationship requires us to face the existential question of who am I beyond this pain? Who am I beyond this pain? And what purpose did this experience serve in my life? By confronting these questions, we step out of spiritual slavery, where we are trapped by the belief that this is just how life is, and instead, we realize that we have the power to define our reality. This is a critical break in the karmic cycle. It's empowering because it reclaims the narrative. Now, looking at what ancient spiritual texts have said about it, and I'll start with the Buddha Dharma, for example. There's a teaching that we are what we think, emphasizing the power of the mind in shaping our reality. So ancient texts suggest, from the Buddhist structure, suggests that our attachment to certain emotions like guilt, shame, or fear, or anger keeps us in the cycle of suffering, the cycle of samsara. Narcissistic abuse often traps us in these low vibrational emotions, which act as chains in our karmic cycle. Also, in the Bhagavad Gita, another ancient text, it teaches us to find liberation, one must rise above the ego and attachment. Narcissistic abuse often binds us to the ego's wounds that are fear, insecurity, and unworthiness. And by releasing these attachments, we free ourselves from the karmic chains and align ourselves with our true self, or the Atman, which is beyond suffering and manipulation. You see? Now, why do empaths get trapped in these karmic loops, and how can empaths break free? Well, empaths are drawn to narcissists because they have an enhanced mirror neuron response, meaning empaths can feel other people's emotions more deeply, very deeply, compared to the average. And while this trait is a superpower, it also makes empaths very vulnerable to narcissistic manipulation. So neuroscientific research shows that empaths may become addicted to the highs and lows of such a relationship, releasing dopamine during periods of validation and stress hormones during manipulation. And the key to breaking this karmic loop lies in awareness and self-compassion. Empaths must learn to rewire their brains to seek fulfillment from within. From within. There's nothing outside, rather than external validation. So practices like mindfulness and meditation and cognitive behavioral therapy and other things like that train the brain to resist emotional reactivity and strengthen self-awareness, allowing empaths to step out of the cycle of samsara, suffering. Now, many people tell themselves, this is just my luck, this is just who I am. But this mindset itself is part of the spiritual slavery that keeps us bound to narcissistic abuse. When we say this is just how it is, we also are unconsciously affirming how powerless we've become, or we are in the moment, which makes it true. That's how powerful we are. Powerful at becoming powerless. And this mindset is a form of spiritual defeat, a surrender to the karmic cycle rather than a decision to change it. Instead, we must shift our self-talk to reflect empowerment and agency. So by saying, this is a pattern I can change, we open the door to transformation. And this is essentially having the right view and seeing things as they are and recognizing our capacity and ability to change and shift. So some practical steps as we wind down this video on how to free yourself from karmic loops include: 1, seeking help from a certified coach like myself, and if you're interested in one-on-one sessions so I can be of help, type transform or book a free session on my website, innermileage.com. But some other steps include cutting energetic ties. I'll go through 3 or 4 of them. Cutting energetic ties. So practices like cord cutting, meditations, and things like that, energy calling back your energy, can help sever the energetic ties that hold a narcissist over us, calling back your energy. Then Engaging in deep self-reflection, for example, journaling and therapy, as I've mentioned, or coaching, can help reveal why we're drawn to the narcissist in the first place and uncover our karmic wounds. And of course, this is one of my favorites, practicing self-compassion can rewire negative beliefs. So neuroplasticity, for example, shows that we can rewire our beliefs through affirmations, gratitude practices, and inner dialogue. That's breaking free from self-defeating beliefs, right? And seek out or get to the point where you're able to attract high vibrational relationships. It's really very key. So you realize that ending a relationship with a narcissist is a powerful act of self-love, but it's also an act of breaking free from karmic chains. In doing so, you reclaim your reality, your narrative, and your life's purpose, and you're no longer bound by the limiting belief that this is just my fate. Instead, you step into the understanding that every choice you make shapes your identity. If this is like you, remember there's no one like you. Peace.